Welcome to Windows on the World. Tonight we're going to look into the cult of Extinction Rebellion, who have been causing disruption. This was all planned a long time ago, and we've done several shows on Extinction Rebellion, and you can find them at windowsontheworld.net. But first of all, I want to tell you about an event organised by two great guys in Oxford called Calvin and Barry, and we're going to be doing our talks, The Bigger Picture, on the 12th of May at a venue to be announced in Oxford. And it can be found on windowsontheworld.net on the homepage, and you can go to their Nexus Events 007 page on Facebook. But do book through windowsontheworld.net. You can go straight to their website. They've got a MailChimp and a website, and it's all linked to windowsontheworld.net. And I'm going to be finding out why Barry and Calvin booked us a bit later in the show. But let's crack on. First of all, I want to get into Extinction Rebellion and explain what's going on. Now, our previous shows on the ER cult gave a lot of information and context to tonight's show. They are Fake Protest Extinction Rebellion and Globalist Fake Revolution. Now, the articles on the website contain internal ER documents and screenshots. We also have the email threats from the sinister so-called dragons within this organisation who protect the inner core of ER personnel. Now, when we looked into this, it all mirrors previous globalist-backed protests and what happened when Occupy was taken over. This is very, very important because none of this is spontaneous. So on this show, I'm going to give a comprehensive view on the Extinction Rebellion cult and how the whole operation is linked in with a much bigger agenda. So check out those shows. You'll find some really interesting stuff, especially those links on windowsontheworld.net, where we have all the information there, all the internal documents from Extinction Rebellion. So we're going to look at the organisations linked to Extinction Rebellion and how there are hundreds and globally thousands of these NGO template organisations all using the same narratives, all backed by big financial interests which are pushing the climate change agenda for profit and ultimately control of the world population and all natural resources. Now, I kid you not, we're even getting information in from places like the World Bank, and this has been going on a long time. This is what we're going to get into in this show, in, let's put it this way, privatisation of all nature. This is all documented fact. But the change agents, social entrepreneurs, psychological nudging, the Saul Alinsky rules for radicals, all of this appeared as part of David Cameron's Big Society in about 2010. And we've reported on that. Do have a look at a document article on windowsontheworld.net, and it's called Change Agents. It's basically all about change agents. Big Society Change Agents is the title. So take a look at that. Big Society Change Agents. There's lots of links on there. It'll give you a background of how this kind of network of NGOs and organisations works in the background pretty much everywhere. But this was a quote I'm going to start the show off with, and it was from an organisation which trains social entrepreneurs. Now, Gale Bradbrook of Extinction Rebellion is a social entrepreneur. Now, this was from Unlimited, which is another organisation which I don't think she's connected with. However, this was a quote that they brought up in the Houses of Parliament. They stated, "The result of the cuts will be one of anger. The idea of the big society is to galvanise that energy." Now, this is why funded protests and gatekeeping organisations are created. Say the People's Assembly You got given a placard, you had your day out, and then you went home. Nothing changed, as it was a government-sponsored event. It's called controlling the narrative. We've got many examples of this, including the Women's March in London a couple of years ago. That was actually funded by the European Bank. Take a look at that one. And then you'll start to see how these NGOs are actually controlling the narrative. So, Extinction Rebellion, first of all, the main thing about this is that we're talking about something here which is not an environmental issue. It's a global action plan and totalitarian system that is being brought in, using climate change as a way to get consent for global governance, along with a loss of rights from the public. So basically the public loses rights over this. Now, many people might find this hard to believe, but it can all be proven and all the evidence is available to you. So let's get some quotes in a minute from big players in the globalist warming industry. But first of all, I've just seen this article, which really does help me and hopefully you to understand what this is all about. It's from the Daily Mail, Saturday, April 20th, 2019. It said, "Green energy war will be won in boardrooms, not on streets. Why climate change could damage your pension." This is a very, very important thing. It says here, some banks, including RBS and HSBC, are no longer financing, in brackets, extreme fossil fuels such as tar sands, and they are likely to be screening assiduously for climate risks in the future. So the banks are beginning to control the narrative. Sir David Attenborough's appearance at the International Monetary Fund in Washington this month, where he was interviewed by Managing Director Christine Lagarde, is another gauge of how seriously economists and financiers are taking the issue. Now, let's think about this. What is David Attenborough, a TV presenter, doing talking to the International Monetary Fund? That shows you that this is an agenda. Attenborough is not a climate scientist. What he does basically is he reads scripts and does voiceovers, and he's travelled around during his life to different parts of the world talking about wildlife. He knows nothing or very little about climate or the environment. That's the first thing. So it carries on here. The nonagenarian broadcaster whose series Our Planet is showing on Netflix painted a bleak picture of the economic, social and human costs if we fail to act on climate change and hurtle towards a spendthrift suicide. Shifting to a more sustainable model will be an enormous undertaking for businesses and governments, it says. Christine Lagarde said 4 trillion, that's £4 trillion, has been spent globally since 2015 on fossil fuel subsidies to industry. Much of it is in the developing world. Removing those subsidies could cause job losses and hardship in the short term, even if the long-term benefits are clear. Individual countries often are reluctant to cut subsidies or to impose carbon taxes if rival nations refuse to do the same for fear of damaging their ability to compete. The natural world is so delicate at the moment, it says here, it needs all the protection it can get, Attenborough said. Now, we've got David Attenborough basically addressing the International Monetary Fund. What on earth is he doing there? Well, that's really what this is all about. A globalization agenda. So let's get into some quotes now from the big players in what I call the globalist warming industry. That's exactly what it is. Now, first of all, we're going to start off with a quote from Ottmar Edenhofer. Now, you probably haven't heard of him, but he's a world expert and IPCC panelist and director of the Mercator Research Institute on Global Commons and Climate Change. This is from an interview that was done in 2010. He stated, "One must say clearly that we redistribute de facto the world's wealth by climate policy. One has to free oneself from the illusion that international climate policy is environmental policy. This has almost nothing to do with environmental policy anymore." Now, this is really what we're talking about. There's a huge disconnect as to what this agenda is and what people think it's about. This was from Al Gore, and it was a congressional testimony in March 21st, 2007, quite a long time ago. He said, we should replace employment taxes with a pollution tax system, principally CO2. I really believe that would help our economy, our competitiveness, meaning his business, of course, and the business of the people who are profiting from mitigation and the global warming agenda. This is from Mikhail Gorbachev in 1996. He stated, the threat of environmental crisis will be the international disaster key that will unlock the new world order. Now this is a quote from Paul Watson, co-founder of Greenpeace. He said, it doesn't matter what is true. It only matters what people believe is true. Now, Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth are globalist mouthpieces for the anthropological global warming agenda, and they facilitate the rolling out of UN Agenda 21. We also revealed on our previous Extinction Rebellion show how Friends of the Earth lawyers represented companies who had trouble with eco-warriors, I kid you not, and they facilitated their eviction. The lawyers for Friends of the Earth at the time, Lawrence Graham, stated, are you under attack from eco-warriors? Should you surrender or fight back? In litigation, we normally defend companies in cases brought by the Environment Agency. Let's have some more quotes now to get you warmed up for the information that's to come. This is from Sir John Houghton, who was the first chairman of the IPCC. If anyone doesn't know, it's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And of course, Extinction Rebellion are basing their need and their call to action on the Special Report 15, which is a UN IPCC document which they basically misunderstood and misrepresented. However, the IPCC put out these papers and they based them on models, computer models, and none of their projections have ever come true. This is the most important thing. Now, Sir John Houghton, he stated, unless we announce disasters, no one will listen. Well, they did, and people did. So, this one's from Christine Stewart, former Canadian Minister for the Environment. She said, no matter if the science of global warming is all phony, climate change provides the greatest opportunity to bring about justice and equity and equality in the world. Now, what she means there is social equity, poverty for all. That's exactly what this is all about, as you'll find out later in the show. And also, if you look at some of our previous shows, go into the archive, you'll find the relevant titles in there. Just have a look and listen to that, because there's a wealth of knowledge in there, as there is once you start digging into this everywhere on the internet. This one is from Professor Chris Folland from the Hadley Centre for Climate Prediction and Research. This is a very important place, and the information that comes out of the Hadley Research Centre is absolutely key to this agenda. He said, the data doesn't matter. We're not basing our recommendations on the data, we're basing them on the climate models. Now, talking of climate models, Dr. David Frame, a climate modeller from Oxford University, said, the models are convenient fictions that provide something very useful. Let's now hear from Timothy Worth, who is president of the UN Foundation. He said, we've got to ride this global warming issue. Even if the theory of global warming is wrong, we will be doing the right thing in terms of economic and environmental policy. Exactly, economic and environmental policy. Now, this one's from Professor Stephen Schneider, Stanford Professor of Climatology, and he was the lead author of many IPCC reports. And he said, we need to get some broad-based support to capture the public's imagination, so we have to offer up scary scenarios, make simplified dramatic statements, and make little mention of any doubts. Each of us has to decide what the right balance is between being effective and being honest. So, let's just finish off that little cachet with a very sensible quote from someone who knew all about totalitarianism. Václav Klaus, former president of the Czech Republic from 2003 to 2013. He stated, man-made global warming is a hoax that threatens our future and the future of our children. Environmentalism, he said, is the new communism. Now, on the subject of fake protest groups, Demos, the think tank which influences all media in the UK and is connected to the security services and MI5, stated, get this, the new democracy will work with a combination of government open infiltration and citizen groups taking direct action. Just let that one sink in. This explains why Extinction Rebellion are there. The new democracy will work with a combination of government open infiltration and citizen groups taking direct action. Extinction Rebellion are that citizen group taking direct action. Now, the globalists need the anti-globalists to carry out their plans and policies, and Extinction Rebellion are doing exactly what is needed to bring in a totalitarian state under the guise of saving the planet. So, here's a bit of climate history. The climate change agenda got going in earnest in a book from a think tank and steering group called the Club of Rome. You may have heard of them. It was called The First Global Revolution. Now, a report by the Council of the Club of Rome by Alexander King and Bertrand Snyder from 1991 was this book which was called The First Global Revolution. Now, the Club of Rome describes itself as a group of world citizens sharing a common concern for the future of humanity. Well, that actually sounds like Extinction Rebellion, doesn't it? Now, the Club of Rome consists of current and former heads of state, UN bureaucrats, high-level politicians and government officials, diplomats, scientists, economists and business leaders from all around the globe. Its aim is to act as a global catalyst for change through the identification and analysis of the crucial problems facing humanity and the communication of such problems to the most important public and private decision makers, as well as to the general public. Now, so a lobbying group that influences government agents and organisations, and of course the hundreds of thousands of NGOs who are all singing from the same hymn sheet. Now, this sounds like just like the Extinction Rebellion manifesto and the ideas of Gale Bradbrook and Roger Hallam, the founders of Extinction Rebellion, when you actually read it back. And we've got lots more to get through which will fill you in on what these NGOs and organisations are up to and why they are tied in so closely to what Extinction Rebellion are doing. But in 1991, let's get back to the Club of Rome, they published the First Global Revolution, and according to the book, divided nations require common enemies to unite them, either a real one or else one invented for the purpose. Because of the sudden absence of traditional enemies, it says, new enemies must be identified. Now, here is the most important bit. I condensed this quote earlier, so I'll read out the whole thing for those who wish to analyse it. There will always be those people who want to take it apart. So let's take it apart ourselves here and now. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine and the like would fit the bill. In their totality and interactions, these phenomena do constitute a common threat which must be confronted by everyone together. Remember, we're all in it together. Nobody will be left behind. This is what the UN are always saying. It means there's no room for anything outside the controlled narrative of opinion, of accepted opinion. Now, this is the unifying rallying call for a mass action to combat the designated problem. This is what it was all about. They carry on, but in designating these dangers as the enemy, we fall into the trap which we have already warned readers about, namely mistaking symptoms for causes. Well, this has now been surpassed by the likes of Extinction Rebellion and most of the template organisations who lump together climate, weather and pollution as being interrelated. That's what they're talking about there. This kind of connection that's been made between climate, weather and pollution. Now, however, the final part of this quote outlines the agenda. They state all these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behaviour that they can be overcome. The real enemy then is humanity itself, which is exactly the point we're at now. This is exactly what we're being told. Extinction Rebellion fits in perfectly with this, as it was looking for a cause for its radical social engineering, which is what it is, and they found it. the one the Club of Rome suggested, and the system of the UN, this is what they need to bring in a totalitarian global system. Now, let's look at the key players in Extinction Rebellion. We've got Gale Bradbrook, George Barder and Roger Hallam. More about George Barder later. Let's first start with Gale Bradbrook. Now, every organisation linked to Gale Bradbrook has the same objectives if you look them up. And it's linked to these same global interests we've talked about so far. We'll be looking at these Templar organisations later. Now, I was going to get on to this bit in the Daily Telegraph. Now, this is a very interesting article. I'll read it out quite quickly. It's all about this view of Extinction Rebellion that is being touted around. It starts, the entitled Trustafarians are making a fool of their cause. If any satirists wanted to mock the Green movement, they could not have come up with anything more absurd than this week's infantile protest in London. As the demonstrators continue to bring gridlock to the capital, their laughable middle-class preciousness has been on full display. The disruption organised by the Extinction Rebellion campaign might be a severe aggravation for workers who actually have to earn a living, but it has been one long street party for an army of well-heeled social parasites. At one point, in a scene that could have come straight from the comic mind of Harry Enfield, some of them held a mass yoga session. Now, the thing is about this, it is absurd, it's surreal, and it is comedy. But the journalist who wrote this piece was expressing accurately what many think when they look at these pretensions and these entitled attitudes of these people gathering for this event. However, like all others writing for the UK media, the author has not looked into the links Extinction Rebellion have and how they are part of a network to implement change. A change that affects everyone and not a change which will benefit anyone except the bankers and elite financiers and the super rich. Now, let's get on to the Green New Deal and the New Deal for Nature. Now, these are the latest sort of incremental steps in the rationing and privatising of all planetary resources through the Global Action Plan, which is United Nations Agenda 21. Now, if you haven't heard of that, look it up. Your local council is implementing it in your area through an organisation called ICLEI, which is Local Government for Sustainable Development. We'll look at that a little bit later on. It's in a lot of our previous shows also. But it's the United Nations Agenda 21, which is now Agenda 2030, which has 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Go and have a read of them. And also, with this stuff, you have to read between the lines. That's very important because the language they use is very fluffy and rather meaningless. But once you know what they actually mean, there is a coded language to this, and it's all about the words sustainability, vibrancy, all this kind of stuff that they put in, which is basically a kind of politically correct narrative which they try and funnel everything into. But the banks will be able to hold whole countries to ransom. That was the whole point of me reading out that Daily Mail article in the first part of the show. This is what it's about. The climate change industry and the banking industry are going to be holding people, organisations and countries to ransom if they do not comply with these draconian green taxation issues and the implementation and rolling out of all the renewables, etc. If you want to have some insight into what renewables are about and why the government is lying about them, have a look at a show we did called The Green Energy Agenda. It's an actual interview with the two main companies who supply the national grid in this country, and they hold nothing back when they describe what's going on. And the future is rationing and power cuts. Have a listen to that. It's really fascinating, straight from the horse's mouth. These are the people who supply the national grid. But the banks will be able to hold these whole countries to ransom if they don't comply with these draconian carbon emissions and offset measures. They can also exclude any organisation or even country they want to under the guise of saving the planet. That really does need to be reiterated. The looting of pensions by the banks is definitely coming. This is being reported, and all you have to do is do the research. This is what the World Bank are talking about. We have reported a huge increase in property stolen by the state. This is another part of what's going on under this agenda, and it has been underway for years. There is an organised agenda to steal property from the elderly and also from other people. In fact, from anybody who becomes delinquent or slightly delinquent for a small amount of debt, because under Agenda 21, private property is unsustainable. You will not be a holder of property. You will be property of the state, indirectly property of the World Bank, global governance and IMF. Now, let's have a look at this. Yes, the next thing I was going to mention was it's the planet which needs saving from the banks. This is the most important thing. The banks are saying they're going to save the planet, but really the planet needs to be saved from the banks. However, there were no visible protests against the banks, who are ultimately behind the climate change agenda, at the Extinction Rebellion protests. Now, along with the oil companies, who also benefit from increased fuel prices and the subsidizations of renewables, this all ties in, and much more on that later. But first, let's look at the overall agenda. The loss of truth and fact is now becoming ever present, and also it's blatantly obvious. So nowhere can it be seen better than in the recent Extinction Rebellion protests. There are no facts presented, and the main psychological tool is the manipulation of emotion through belief. We're talking here about emotion and belief over facts. Now, let's get a quote from Gale Bradbrook, the founder of Extinction Rebellion. She states, "In social change theory, people act on emotion, not logic and fact." Remember that Gale is a social entrepreneur and a change agent. So she's stating that in social change theory, people act on emotion, not logic and fact. And this is key point with Extinction Rebellion, because none of these people who we've asked know anything about the facts of climate change. They don't even know the origin or the foundation or the content of the document which their manifesto relies on, which is the Special Report 15 from the UN IPCC, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Now, Gale and Roger Hallam, the founders of Extinction Rebellion, are using psychological triggers and concepts. This is their main aim. The climate change agenda is just the best hook they have. So basically, this is a new form of globalist revolution, a bit like the Arab Spring, and we'll get to that a bit later on as well, and this revolution that happened in Eastern Europe. So, as we've revealed over the past few years, there are a network of organisations and NGOs which work as a shadow government in countries all over the world, and the UK is no exception. In fact, most of these organisations are linked to the UK. Your environment is being re-engineered, and it's happening worldwide. Totalitarianism, it's basically a totalitarianism run by financial institutions. Now, the manipulation of all this is well thought out, but it's really simple, and this is what we keep reiterating. It's so important that this agenda seems hugely complicated, but it's not. It's actually very simple. Otherwise, it wouldn't work in every country in the world, would it? You have to have a template for that. You can't just keep rolling out different agendas. So it's all encompassing, but the same template is being introduced everywhere. It's not overwhelmingly complicated, but it is mind-blowingly huge in the scale of its operation and its operatives, most of whom have no idea about the end result of their contributions to the global action plan. It's very compartmentalized. Well, that was a good place to start, but what does it mean to you? This is the question, and how can you easily understand or even start to believe such a weird and outlandish series of statements? I'm trying to get other people on board here because this is throwing people in at the deep end. But if you're a newcomer to the show and have never looked into the documentation of the UN Agenda 21, this might seem rather overwhelming and even far-fetched, but all of the evidence is there. Nothing that I'm telling you tonight is based on hearsay. It's all fact and evidence. So you're going to say, if you haven't heard of this, surely I would have heard about it. Well, surely I would see signs of it. Well, you have, and you do. But the enormity of this project and its insidious nature is not being talked about in any mainstream media. The only media you see and hear is owned by the same people, also known as Associated Press and Reuters. Now, the documents and goals of the Global Action Plan are all available, but unless you know where to look, you will not find them. Nobody in any mainstream outlet even mentions it. and nobody in Extinction Rebellion ever mentions it either. Now, in the present system, there are those who know what's going on and the masses who have no idea. And in between those who know and those who don't, you have a huge administrative group of gatekeepers who are allowed enough information to carry out their part of the operation whilst being basically ignorant of anything outside of their small cog in what is this huge apparatus. Now, this is how all organisations work on a global project with its layers and layers of administration. So as a primer for tonight's show, I hope that worked, because we're half an hour into the show tonight, and I probably will go for the 2 hours, because this is going to be very, very in-depth, but you're going to find out all of the organisations that are linked into Extinction Rebellion, so you can look into them yourselves. Now, I just want to get a quote here from someone who listens to the show, and this ties in to what I'm talking about, a template rollout of basically the same thing over and over again. Now, this is an anti-fracking site in the UK, a site infiltrated with agents that came into fracking protests after infiltrating and taking over the Occupy movement in London. Now, I know who these people are because I know who those people were at Occupy, and they're still around. So these subversives who took over Occupy and turned it into basically the precursor to Extinction Rebellion with its consensus meetings, its facilitators and its people's assemblies, were all part of Occupy and a thing called the Bank of Ideas and even Democracy Village. We'll get into that a little bit later, because that's where George Barder comes in, of Extinction Rebellion, linked into Democracy Village, which was a group of paid activists who took over Parliament Square to get rid of Brian Hoare and Barbara Tucker, who were there for years basically protesting about the Iraq War. So the real protesters have been victims of these agents in this fracking site, and their techniques are subversive and their regime is totalitarian. They form a hierarchy and control the narrative and are the only voices ever heard in mainstream media. You will not see any real protesters being interviewed by mainstream media. All of the people on there are gatekeepers. I know this because I've done the research. Now, okay, this lady's sent in this quote. It's exactly how you told us on the show. These councillors are also school governors. They took their children to the school strike day at Preston, all exactly how you described the UN agendas. We've had it all at Preston New Road. It's as though we are in a monitored experiment by the state. That's absolutely it in a nutshell. Then she goes on, it's getting worse. All Rothery's cultists, this is this Tina Rothery, who gets all of the publicity and controls the narrative at the fracking protests, said all her cultists are standing in the local council elections, taking over, change agents. She says some pretended to be Labour supporters for years, but they are standing as independents. This is going on all over the country, and it's not just at protest sites, it's in your local area. Everything is being infiltrated by people who are trained in these techniques and mentored into the sustainable development goals. And ultimately that's going to mean taking away your rights, stopping your driving, and a bit further down the road, taking your property. Now, if you don't know about this type of infiltration, we have reported it for years, so do take a look at that article on Windows on the World called Big Society Change Agents. Now, there is no representation locally, even in your vicinity, that is not part of this agenda. This is so important, and anything which stands in its way is targeted. This does not always work. And when the wheels fall off this juggernaut, many of those exposed crash and disappear. Now, we've made this happen in the past, and so can you if you're concerned about it. So let's get on with the show, and let's have a look at the latest manipulation of public opinion, right? This is so funny, and it completely, for me, sums up Extinction Rebellion. This is the headline of the week from the London Metro. Get this for a headline. Wi-Fi turned off to stop people gluing themselves to trains. Now, call me old-fashioned, but when my Wi-Fi goes off, the first thing I do is glue myself to a train. I mean, you could not make up a headline like that. In 100 years' time, anyone from here or any other inhabited corner of the universe who saw that newspaper headline would deem this to be either sort of surreal comedy, or more likely, they'd deem the person who wrote it to be clinically insane. But that just summed it up perfectly for me. But this is a post-truth world, and the Extinction Rebellion protests being promoted by global interests are a pantomime. It is a post-truth protest. So let's get on to the Extinction Rebellion theory of change. And it's roughly as follows. 1, it says they want to give people the scientific facts on climate change. This is part of their manifesto. They want to give people the scientific facts on climate change. Well, this is their main aim, and the one they have so far failed to address. They demand the government tells the truth on climate change. Well, it never has and it never will. If it did, $1 billion industry would fall apart overnight. That's the climate change industry. But it's worth reiterating here that Gale Bradbrook, one of the founders of Extinction Rebellion, states, in social change theory, people act on emotion, not logic and fact. It's well worth remembering that. All right, it's the second time I've said it, but it's so important. And Gale is a social entrepreneur, and she's well entrenched in the corporate world of lobbying groups and NGOs. Let's get on to her organisation, Rising Up. It states on the Rising Up website that it is normalising. This is what she states. She states that Rising Up and Extinction Rebellion, which is basically came out of Rising Up, she states that Extinction Rebellion are normalising civil disobedience. So normalising civil disobedience. When something is normalised, it no longer has any effect. So normalising civil disobedience would render it ineffective and useless. Interestingly, this is a side issue, but you might find this of use. Normalisation is the fourth and final stage of what they call ideological subversion, the old Soviet KGB plan for destroying a nation. You have demoralisation, destabilisation, a crisis, and then normalisation. Normalisation is when the iron fist is in place and dissent has been crushed, the new regime is in power, and the citizens are demoralised, subservient, and fully under martial law. Now, Gale Bradbrook works for Citizens Online, which is a digital inclusion platform linked into the rollout of smart cities, 5G, the Internet of Things. And she's directly linked to the UK Government Cabinet Office. That's Gale. Gale Bradbrook of Extinction Rebellion is linked in to the UK Cabinet Office. And since she was linked to these globalist corporations and interests and NGOs through this connection, get this, her profile has recently disappeared. It's been removed from the Citizens Online website. Now, this coincided with the Extinction Rebellion protests in London and her numerous television appearances. So for some reason, Gale Bradbrook is a very important asset of the state, and her identity and image must be protected. Well, it may be a bit late for that because the cat's out of the bag there. But one of our contributors states, she's not showing up on Companies House now, which is strange, as past directorship should still show up. So even if she has resigned and there's a perfectly good explanation, like she's got a bridge to occupy and no time for other charity work, it smacks of wanting her links with establishment figures and 5G pushes to be hidden. Well, that's exactly it. This is what it's all about. And we saw this with people who we found out, once we find out about them, put their names out there, they start disappearing off websites. Now, this is extremely important. And it mirrors what has happened before with these organised protests, which do the work of the establishment in corralling public opinion in the right direction. So basically, the Extinction Rebellion is not anti-globalist, it's globalist, and the anti-globalists are needed by the globalists to implement their policies. So they fund them to do it, and they back them to do it. I've heard people say, well, this just came out of thin air, it popped up like a mushroom. No, it didn't. Absolutely not. This is the result of an awful lot of research. It's the result of an awful lot of lobbyists getting together and pushing it, along with the government. So this is not an anti-government protest at all. It would never have been allowed to take off the way it did if it was anti-government, because the police would have gone in there very, very hard, exactly as they have done at the fracking protests. The police have been over the top violent at those protests. They work with infiltrators, they take people out and they stitch people up. That's not happened to Extinction Rebellion. It's one big happy clappy event, a big yoga exercise, a big indulgence, a big disco in a pink yacht in the middle of central London, with Emma Thompson flying in, increasing her carbon footprint whilst telling everyone not to, and spouting the most hideous rubbish. It is very true that actors should learn their lines and use very good script writers, do good work. When actors start spouting things like Emma Thompson does, well, or I use the term actor loosely there, but when people like her start spouting this nonsense, it's embarrassing. However, it was lapped up by all the people around the pink yacht. But getting back to this mirrors what has happened before with these organised protests, which do the work of the establishment in basically corralling public opinion in the right direction. So the paid activists of Occupy also had information linking them with NGOs and lobbying groups. Okay, so let's move on and basically get into what Piers Corbin had to say. Piers Corbin was down there at the Extinction Rebellion protest, and I caught up with him earlier today. He actually did a counter-protest which made it into the news, and hysterically, it was actually the London Metro which put him down as a climate change protester, when in fact he was protesting against the climate change protesters. Here's what Piers had to say.
I mean, most of them didn't even have a clue as to how much CO2 there is in the atmosphere. And they just voiced evidence when we asked evidence as though it's been hot here or there, and with now record melting of ice and so on. Just all things which are untrue anyway. We pointed out that Walrus Gate, i.e. the expose of David Attenborough, was something whereby the BBC had been propagating falsity. So most of them that we spoke to were, brainwashed, but there were a reasonable proportion who did actually engage in conversation and took our leaflets. The people in charge, and there are people in charge despite the fact they pretend there's not, for the second little protest we had, they made a counter protest. Namely, they placed themselves in front of our banner so they hoped people wouldn't read it. But when people were coming up Waterloo Bridge, it looked as if actually they were part of our protest. So it was quite amusing. Passers-by generally were supportive of what we have to say because they were pissed off with the obstructions on the pavement and road. The articles in the Daily Mail and the Daily Express were both quite reasonable articles. There were a lot of comments, and in the comments, most of the comments were in favour of us, and on the like and dislike, where you on each comment, basically we got about 90% likes and 10% dislikes on the favourable comments about us. So it's very interesting because it means those readerships certainly are not impressed by Extinction Rebellion and recognise there is something else going on apart from CO2.
Exactly. We're going to get all that tonight on the show, and if we've got time, I will be in touch with you a bit later on. Thanks a lot. That's great. Cheers.
Thank you. All the best. Bye.
That was Piers Corbin, who I spoke to earlier on, and we might get Piers on again a little bit later in the show when I've got through some more of this information, because the information tonight in this show is key to understanding what Extinction Rebellion is actually about. But the organisers of this cult are first and foremost engaged in social engineering and psychology. That's the most important thing. And they've found the cause they need, which is the global warming and climate change issue. They know nothing of the science or even the agenda behind the issue, but are carrying out the goals and objectives of the UN, World Bank, and its thousands of lobbying groups, NGOs and intergovernmental bodies for the implementation of policies which they know nothing about, but which are in effect to restrict, tax and reduce population on the back of the biggest ever and most well-publicised propaganda issue in recent history. It's the same agenda that Al Gore was pushing for profit and still is, despite the blatant lies blasted by a judge in his climate change fantasy and inconvenient truth. It had 15 major lies or errors, and the judge stopped there. And despite the ruling, it was still shown as a factual documentary to scare children in schools, with no addendums about the lies, which was basically the ruling of the court. The ruling of the court was that they had to actually disclose this. They had to have a fair and balanced argument. Of course, you don't get a fair and balanced argument. In San Francisco on the 22nd of March 2018, there was a court case brought against oil companies, and it backfired against the councils that brought the case. It was very interesting because it exposed the consensus and basically the fraud of the climate change lobbyists, those who are lobbying for taxation through climate change. A federal judge overseeing a lawsuit dismissed plaintiffs who brought in the case that oil companies conspired to cover up global warming science. San Francisco and Oakland filed suit against 5 major companies, including Exxon and Chevron, demanding money for damages for global warming allegedly caused by fossil fuels. Their claim was that fossil fuel companies engaged in a large-scale, sophisticated advertising and public relations campaign to promote fossil fuels when they, in inverted commas, knew their products would contribute to dangerous global warming. US District Judge William Alsup said, "The city's suits against oil companies do not show an industry conspiracy to suppress climate science from the public." Judge Alsup said plaintiffs show nothing of the sort regarding some sort of conspiracy against science. The judge rebuked Oxford professor Miles Allen for presenting a misleading and exaggerated illustration regarding the current amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Miles Allen was illustrating how much CO2 was now in the atmosphere when the judge rebuked him. "It's 400 parts per million, but you're making it look like it's 10,000 parts per million," said the judge. Professor Allen was forced to admit his slideshow was misleading. He said, "Your Honour is quite right," he agreed. Now, Judge Alsop also mocked the numerous times the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change predictive models got the current climate trends wrong, and catastrophic weather never arrived. Now, the main claims from Extinction Rebellion relate to the projections of the IPCC in their SR15 document. That's their most recent document. Now, looking at several IPCC models and their relationship to reality, this is what the judge said to Chevron's lawyers. That he said, "So your point is that the IPCC models overstate the problem. Instead of doom and gloom, it's just gloom," he said. Now, this is the main point about the so-called settled science. It is based on computer modelling and projection and on what are in effect no more than fictional scenarios which have at all times failed to materialise. Now, more on this in the latest UN IPCC document later, which even Extinction Rebellion have completely misinterpreted according to its author. That's another point. So Extinction Rebellion are using the SR15 document as their foundation, and they have actually misinterpreted that document according to the author of the SR15 document. So this is the document they are misinterpreting and also basing their whole campaign on. That's extremely important. Now, this has been escalated by the UN and NGO puppet projected into the limelight by a PR company. Now, I'm going to get onto this. We've covered this before, but basically, the United Nations and these NGOs are promoting, quite shamefully, and manipulating this young girl with Asperger's called Greta Thunberg and the worldwide school climate strikes that she's actually instigating. Now, this is an article from The Spectator. It was revealed that Greta Thunberg's school strike had coincided neatly with the launch of a book about climate change written by her mother, Malina Ernman. Is that a coincidence? It looks less likely when you learn from the same article that the first publicity of Thunberg's protest came via the social media of the book's PR man, Ingmar Rentzog, on the day of its launch. It seems that Rentzog took a freelance photographer along to the school strike, later posting her pictures on his Facebook and video on his company's YouTube channel. Meanwhile, Swedish journalist Henrik Alexanderson has claimed that Thunberg's much-touted speech to the Katowice summit was actually delivered to an almost empty hall. Now, this was at the end of the Oceans Conference of the World Economic Forum. And she was basically brought on in Poland at the COP climate change conference, right at the end of it. And remember that it's the World Economic Forum that are pushing her as well. And it says, perhaps unsurprising that the room was empty when she gave her speech, that it was near the end of the day. Yet it was hard to tell this from the film of her speech, which went viral, which only showed close-ups of her face, a shot of the stage and a brief sequence of an apparently appreciative crowd. Well, that's the way television works. All you have to do is reverse the angles, and you use some footage from earlier in the day when people were clapping. Just cut it into the reverse angle of Greta, and there you go. You've got a room full of satisfied punters. But as well as working for Greta's mother, Rensog had also recently launched a business called We Don't Have Time, which is a climate-focused PR agency. In October 2018, he invited Greta to join the company's youth advisory board, and in the weeks that followed, he used her image intensively ahead of the company's share issue. This seems to have been very successful, bringing in something short of £1 million. Now, there's a really good website called The Wrong Kind of Green, and it has a lot of information about the manufacturing of Greta Thunberg. Now, but this all links in with Extinction Rebellion, as Greta Thunberg, the new World Bank and UN mascot, will be paraded out by them in the weeks to come. So look out for that. I think she's coming over quite soon. But this is also classic subversion. Basically, this climate strike issue is turning children against their parents if they don't agree with the agenda. So, given the huge amount of publicity and being the poster girl for climate change, this is really interesting. Greta Thunberg only has 1,692 subscribers on YouTube as from today. Now, that's a minuscule amount in relation to her public profile. So maybe the phenomena is purely PR, because it was all dreamt up and put out there by a PR company. But let's get back to Extinction Rebellion. Gale Bradbrook's organisation Rising Up operates through the limited company Compassionate Revolution Limited. Rising Up comes out of police-infiltrated groups such as Reclaim the Power, Climate Camp and Democracy Village, which was the group which successfully removed anti-war protesters Brian Hoare and Barbara Tucker from Parliament Square and banned all permanent protest and gatherings there. So, the agents of Democracy Village basically used every dirty trick imaginable against Brian Hoare and Barbara Tucker. The anti-Iraq war protesters that had been there for several years, and Brian Hoare was bullied, physically attacked and slandered. Now, George Barder, the agent of Democracy Village, is a director of the holding company of Extinction Rebellion, along with Gale Bradbrook and Roger Hallam. Now, that is where all the public donations are going. But Brian Hoare's website, Brian Hoare TV, described George Barder, who's now part of the inner core of Extinction Rebellion, as the very phony schmuck Mr. Barder from the Occupy Democracy/London Arrivists, who are a spin-off from MI5 Democracy Village. So, it's trademark British government liars, just changing between monikers. Now that's their words, not mine. That's a direct quote from brianhoare.tv website, which is still there. However, the carbon copy rollout of ER it's a carbon copy of the fake activists who took over Occupy, turning it away from the financial system to the profitable business of global warming big business. But George Barder, one of the core team of Extinction Rebellion, was on the front line of Democracy Village and another paid activist. In other words, an asset of global governance and corporations. Now, Climate Camp Action was another fake police infiltrated organisation linked to Extinction Rebellion through the sources that we've just talked about. Now, so ER was where the Occupy, this is really interesting now, I need to make this point, that Climate Camp Action was allegedly where the Occupy donations went into this Climate Camp Action bank account. And these donations to Occupy were never to be seen again. So all that money donated by the public, and allegedly £1 million donated from Vivienne Westwood, disappeared. Well, what can you say about that? Except, nice one, Sarge. So it is the same group who set up a fake squat in a Swiss bank in the city of London, backed by globalists to promote the climate change taxation agenda. Now, more than one of the Extinction Rebellion inner core of publicly funded activists was involved in that project too. So George Soros was behind the takeover and funding of Occupy, and also this fake squat in a Swiss bank in the city of London called the Bank of Ideas. We'll see our film on it. It's called Inside Occupy in the Bank of Ideas, and you'll see how the structure of Extinction Rebellion is the same as that in the Bank of Ideas and the infiltrated and Soros-driven Occupy. It's just slightly updated with more simple psychology added on. But let's look at another of Extinction Rebellion's not-so-distant cousins, Earth First. Now, it says on the website, because we're going to go into this now and look at how these are just cookie cutters of each other. They're just templates. They're all cardboard cutouts that say the same thing. All of these NGOs are backing global governance. Let's have a look at what Earth First has to say. The general principles behind Earth First are non-hierarchical. A bit like Extinction Rebellion, a bit like Occupy, but they have a hierarchy. That's interesting, isn't it? They're a non-hierarchical organisation, or Earth First, and the use of direct action again, to confront, stop and eventually reverse the forces that are responsible for the destruction of the Earth and its inhabitants. Earth First is not a cohesive group or campaign, but a convenient banner for people who share similar philosophies to work under. Sounds a bit like ISIS. Another group linked to Extinction Rebellion, which is almost a carbon copy, no pun intended, of its manifesto. Well, what a coincidence. Let's carry on. The only difference in the operation here is that Gale Bradbrook and Roger Hallam used the structure for Extinction Rebellion that they're calling a holocracy. It is in effect the same as the infiltrated and taken over Occupy, with its facilitators, phony consensus with the demand for citizens' assemblies, the same management concept as the Occupy General Assemblies, these meetings that they held all over the world that were all the same, which used the same hand signals, making people look stupid, with facilitators, dragons in the audience to shut down anybody who found out what was going on or who was counter to the narrative, and basically people dotted around the room to attack anybody that they thought were going to subvert their agenda. So that's how it works. It's called Delphi technique, and your local council uses it all the time. So the hierarchy is in the background, as are the more sinister, get this, dragons, who attack and marginalise anyone who questions their totalitarian narratives. Now, Dragon's Echo and Dragon Tango of Extinction Rebellion threatened someone who merely asked questions. Gale Bradbrook demanded to be removed from this email list and failed to answer any relevant questions whatsoever. Now, those emails were quite chilling, and we did read them out on a show the other week. Basically, they made threats. They said things like, "Who on earth is this character?" The character who asked the questions. "He sounds quite confused for someone with so much experience," says Dragon Tango. "Only joking, we've been reading all about you. Time to take a step back and stop speculating widely or wildly. We've had a quick consensus meeting." Oh, what a surprise, a consensus meeting, eh? She said, "We have a quick consensus meeting this morning here at Dragon's Base. I kid you not. Our affinity group think that you should issue a full retraction as soon as you've slept for long enough for your brain to be working again. Please don't make me have to bring in another agent. That would be Dragon Alpha. She's the coordinator of the new action group. I should mention at this point that this is a legal action group. She has a law degree too, unlike myself and Dragon Echo." So basically, this is the way they go on, and they make threats with menaces to members of the public who ask them what is actually going on. The person who wrote in was very mild in his approach, but what they didn't like was that their identities were all basically in the same email to each other. Let's have a look what it says here. They also had a go at Frances Leader, who's an activist, and accused her of being a police agent, which is totally ironic because Frances is always getting attacked by these people and has always worked on her own. So basically they use reversal. They accuse you of what they're doing. Classic technique, that is. But I have got those emails. If anybody wants to see them, I can send you a copy. Just email me at info@windowsontheworld.net. In fact, you can look at our latest article on Extinction Rebellion, the Extinction Rebellion fake protest, which was the last show we did. They are printed on there. So there you go. Dragons in the den. It's the same as Occupy, the same template, the same rollout with more psychological kind of manipulation going on. Now, Gale Bradbrook is advocating non-violent social change with her organisation Rising Up, which is basically a cardboard cutout group doing the bidding of the World Bank and UN, as we've said. Now, Extinction Rebellion is described as a campaign by the Rising Up network that promotes a fundamental change of the UK's political and economic system to one which maximises well-being and minimises harm. Now, this statement says very little and can be tagged onto any cause whatsoever. It's just like a coat hanger. It can also pretty much mean anything. It's clear, though, it wants to create a feel-good factor, which is what these protests are all about. They're not really protests. They appeal to hedonists. They appeal to narcissists, people who want to turn up and be seen, basically. On the Extinction Rebellion website, it states, "Our experience is that when the truth is told about climate change, it's very hard for people to hear the latest data and the scientists who are breaking rank to speak out." Now, this is actually the polar opposite of the facts. It is those who go against the global warming agenda who have to break ranks, as those who get the funding, whose voices are heard and included in the IPCC reports, go along with and profit from the anthropological global warming theory and are heard all the time. That's all you hear in the media. So this then is a lie. As we know, it is often only when scientists retire and no longer need funding that they're able to speak out. That's been my experience of it. Have a look at Banned Climate Conference, goes ahead on YouTube. You will see the scientists who used to work for the IPCC, then started disagreeing with their consensus, then found themselves out of a job. Take a look at that. Very interesting. It's still on YouTube. Banned Climate Conference goes ahead. You will hear from the scientists who nobody ever hears about, and the scientists who actually contributed to the IPCC before the IPCC pulled the plug on them. So the mission of Extinction Rebellion, it said on their website, is to spark and sustain a spirit of creative rebellion, which will enable much needed changes in our political, economic and social landscape. We endeavour to mobilise and train organisers to skillfully open up space so that communities can develop the tools they need to address Britain's deeply rooted problems. We work to transform our society into one that is compassionate, inclusive, sustainable, equitable and connected. These are exactly the goals of United Nations Agenda 2030. Basically, this is just a template from the Sustainable Development Goals. So Extinction Rebellion are not independent in what they're doing here whatsoever. They are merely a template organisation. So Extinction Rebellion are saying they are just the same type of trained facilitators and organisers as change agents taking over the narrative of public opinion in your local area through the council. It's the same thing that's going on here. These councils imposing draconian policies of road closures, getting rid of private transport with no real consultation, just group consensus, the C word, which they all talk about there, created through lobbyists and employees, plus of course the social entrepreneurs in your area and every area in the UK. And these social entrepreneurs are social entrepreneurs just like social entrepreneur Gale Bradbrook. Now, there's no difference in approach between the infiltrators of every community in the UK and the tactics of Extinction Rebellion. That's the point I need to make here. And Rising Up are funded by Lush and the Guerrilla Foundation. So let's look at the Guerrilla Foundation website, see what it says. It says, true to our name, the Guerrilla Foundation helps activists and grassroots movements build pockets of resistance. Is this all starting to sound a bit samey? And also, whenever you see the word grassroots movements, you know that these are controlled. They all use the term grassroots because, guess what? They're not. Let's carry on. We'll help activists and grassroots movements to build pockets of resistance. Oh yeah, we'll control it though with our facilitators that will contribute to larger societal transformation, which is social engineering, which is the Global Action Plan, Agenda 2030. They say toward a living, circular economy with a deeply democratic society that prioritises social and ecological well-being. So, yeah, another cardboard cutout template of all the other sites advocating the wishes of the UN and the World Bank, presented as some sort of radical change, that change is the implementation of these policies which are taking away your rights and future through austerity, the austerity plans, huge taxation enforced with basically totalitarian efficiency. That's what this is all about. So if the UN and Extinction Rebellion get their way, you will have no choice or say in the matter. You will live in a surveilled, high-density city, in a tiny apartment near public transport. That is the Global Action Plan carried out in every city in the UK. That is UN Habitat. They have conferences every year. Check that out. They're actually planning in your local town, city or village, and you don't know who they are. UN Habitat. Agenda 2030, that's the plan to be rolled out completely by 2030, and this is why Extinction Rebellion say there's a timeline of 12 years. Well, it's an exaggeration and distortion of that United Nations SR15 document. As I said, even the author of the UN SR15 document has publicly denounced their interpretation of it. So Extinction Rebellion can't even get that right. They can't even repeat what's in a document. So the change Extinction Rebellion are campaigning for is the change which the globalists want implemented, basically. Extinction Rebellion are merely an arm of that agenda. They're there to get the public to willingly participate in their own enslavement by demonstrating for it and enforcing the government to implement policies which it already has to implement through the UN. So there's no choice going on here, only consensus, the C word. It's made to look as though we're all agreed because trained facilitators control the narrative of public opinion with their fellow change agents. Works the same in every town, city and village in the country. If you don't believe me, go to a council meeting and try and put across some opposition. See what happens to you. You will be co-opted, or they will basically try and destroy what you're doing. I've had this from all over the country. Now, every city in every country is implementing this Global Action Plan. And the organisation that does it is known as ICLEI, I-C-L-E-I. Have you ever heard of them? No, I don't suppose you have, but look up ICLEI, which is Local Government for Sustainable Development globally. Look at their website, ICLEI, and you will see that basically it's a global action plan implemented at your local level. That's where these policies are coming in through ICLEI, into your local council. The consensus will be enforced with armies of not too clever but well-paid agents of change, a bit like Gale and Roger. Now let's go to the Commonweal website for an interview with Gale Bradbrook. It says, Rising Up is an activist collective, is it really, that's seeding widespread action against our ecocidal, unjust and corrupt system. That's a bit vague, isn't it? And inviting us all to explore and implement the alternatives. Now, these groups are all about collectivism, which is tightly controlled by a governing doctrine of soundbite manifestos. That's how they do it. It's social engineering at its simplistic best. But let's go to the first paragraph of the Rising Up website, and it gives the game away, yeah? So Rising Up was formed by activists who have also been part of Compassionate Revolution, which is Gale's company, holding company, Earth First, Occupy, Plain Stupid, Radical Think Tank and Reclaim the Power. Rising Up is linked to Compassionate Revolution, which was birthed at the Occupy movement. Now here is the manifesto of one of these organisations. Let's start with the Radical Think Tank. The Radical Think Tank aims to create a collective of researchers, activists and community organisers basically read trained facilitators schooled in Delphi technique to control the narrative of public opinion and change agents who will stop at nothing to reach their objectives. That's what they mean by community organisers. All this came out of the big society. There's hundreds of thousands of these people all over the country, and I'm not overestimating that. I'm probably underestimating it actually, because I'm going on figures of a few years ago. It says the radical think tank will research into grassroots campaigns, both past and present, in order to discover effective mechanisms to achieve this bottom-up transformative political change. More generally, it will research practical strategies and processes to create radical political participation. Practical strategies and processes to create radical political participation. Little bit like Extinction Rebellion. Meaning psychological manipulation and brainwashing, plus infiltration and neutralization of any real protest group. That's what these people are there for. The radical think tank, it says, is an organization that intends to be embedded in the communities in which it operates. So you could have a radical think tank, change agent, in your community, because they intend to embed themselves there, and that's exactly what they do. They infiltrate from within. This is the KGB style subversion and infiltration, and they are openly stating that they're doing it. Let's remember again what that UK think tank Demos said. Demos are linked into MI5. Any paper that Demos put out, whether it's about conspiracy theories or the rise of the far right, which is a meme that came out of MI5 because they needed to find a new threat, and the new threat was the people who voted Brexit. So we're now all far right, people who vote Brexit. Anyone outside the control narrative of public opinion is far right. What they do is polarization. You have to fight over two sides. Again, two lies to fight over. But it says here, UK think tank Demos said, the new democracy will work with a combination of government open infiltration and citizen groups taking direct action. That's what we're talking about here. That is what Extinction Rebellion and all these organisations linked to it are about. Everything Demos puts out is put into mainstream TV. But just check out Fake Protest Extinction Rebellion, because there's a lot of information on there which will help you actually understand some of what we're going into tonight. Now, Demos put out this paper years ago called The Unreality of Conspiracy Theories, and we challenged them on it. They didn't know anything about what they call conspiracy theories. They just knew about how they were going to control the narrative of how people were allowed to talk about conspiracy theories. But they're basically, MI5 narratives, the far right threat, meaning Brexit, and anyone outside the politically correct and controlled corridor of accepted public opinion. That's what it's all about. Demos admitted being in close contact with MI5 when we actually debated with them. Now, all these organisations linked to Extinction Rebellion are about citizens groups taking direct action and open infiltration. That is so important. All of the things we've talked about so far are exactly what Demos talk about, this new democracy which will work with citizen groups taking direct action and open infiltration. Everything in this country is infiltrated, sometimes openly, sometimes it's overt, sometimes it's covert. Now, but this is the new democracy, basically. It's globalist-controlled opposition groups which lobby for global governance through the UN and the World Bank, and it's thousands of NGOs and lobbyists. Radical think tanks state we are a think and do tank. This means our intention is not simply to publish papers, but rather to popularise this effective knowledge and bring it to the heart of, guess what, grassroots campaigning, like they'd know anything about that. It basically means controlling the narrative for the state by recruiting those who fit the bill. That's all it's about. It says we are already actually working with a number of campaigns across London to bring about effective political organisation and strategy, and to empower them to democratically develop approaches which best enable them to achieve their aims. Well, wait a minute, if you start up a group, don't you know what your aims and objectives are? So basically what these people do, and I've seen this with other groups like this, these radical kind of housing groups, they'll come in and give you a campaign. They'll basically give you an off the cuff or basically bespoke campaign for you to campaign over. It's absolutely incredible. It's basically Brave New World. You know, they do everything for you. This is what the People's Assembly is about. This is what all the controlling of the narrative is about. But let's get back to the point. This all ties into the aims and objectives of Roger Hallam and Gale Bradbrook, the founders of Extinction Rebellion and the directors of the company which holds Extinction Rebellion Compassionate Revolution Limited. So let's look at the police and state agent organisation Reclaim the Power. Now this is a definitely infiltrated group, and activists or real activists up and down the country I know have had real problems with this lot moving in and taking over, basically ruining what they're doing and controlling the narrative at fracking protests and beyond. So Reclaim the Power. Let's have a look at their manifesto and see if it's any different from any of the other cookie cutter type organisations that we've been talking about so far. It says Reclaim the Power is a UK-based direct action network fighting for social, environmental and economic justice. Well, just for a change. We aim to build a broad-based movement working in solidarity with frontline communities to effectively confront environmentally destructive industries and the social and economic forces driving climate change. Well, they know all about what's driving climate change. It's NGOs like them. It's not the weather. In other words, they echo the manifesto of the United Nations, the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, and all the NGOs and lobbyists who support the anthropological global warming agenda. Now, let's get on to another cardboard cutout template NGO, Earth First, another organisation of the cardboard cutout variety. Yes, let's have a look at their website. The general principles behind Earth First are non-hierarchical. Oh, does that sound a bit like Extinction Rebellion and Occupy and any others? I think it does. So they're non-hierarchical organisation and the use of direct action. They all seem to want to use this word direct action, don't they? To confront, stop and eventually reverse the forces that are responsible for the destruction of the Earth and its inhabitants. Earth First is not a cohesive group or campaign, but a convenient banner for people who share similar philosophies to work under. Again, like some kind of mercenaries, it's incredible, really. It is another template infiltration group, and it's just like all others linked to Extinction Rebellion. In other words, another gatekeeper for global interests run by facilitators and change agents. So let's look at another of those affiliated Extinction Rebellion groups, Reclaim the Power, probably the most well-known government operation known to real activists. Let's look at them again. Their agents have successfully disrupted fracking activists for years. Again, Reclaim the Power is a UK-based direct action network fighting for social, environment and economic justice. Yes, we've just done all that. I'm just going through my notes here. But basically, where have we heard this before? They're all the same. You could read any one of these out and it'd have the same objectives with a couple of other sentences thrown in. Where have we heard it before, but more importantly, where haven't we heard it before tonight? Now, all these groups could have the same website basically and save themselves a fortune, couldn't they? But that's not how an operation on this scale works. However, hundreds of template groups are necessary to confuse and obfuscate to the public, so they remain unaware that they are all controlled opposition, these groups. So let's now look at the most ridiculous of these template fake radical groups linked to Extinction Rebellion, Plain Stupid. They got the name of their website right. Here is a headline from their website. Wealthy frequent flyers are the real problem when it comes to aviation growth, and it's time we did something about it. Well, I hope they told that to Emma Thompson, who flew in for a publicity session whilst berating all those less important plebs who might want to fly. Well, Thompson flew into Virtue Signal and get on TV. She made a monumental fool of herself and basically proved that actors should stick to scripts written by good writers, not read out the kind of stuff that Extinction Rebellion are putting into the public. But calling her an actor, well, it's maybe overstating it a bit, but it's a good example of ego over ability. She's exactly the sort of person that they need. That she's exactly the sort of person that's attracted to them because it's all about them. It's not really about the cause, it's about me and the cause. Look at me, look what I'm doing. But now She's also one of the Extinction Rebellion activists. That's a good word for the ER people. They're activists. Not everybody. Some of them are very sincere, but basically there's a huge amount of activists within their ranks, displaying fake emotion instead of facts and repeating sound bites over critical thinking. Very little critical thinking going on there. But getting back to emotion over fact, which, remember, is Gale Bradbrook's philosophy. Gale states, "We were also in grief, and more papers were coming out on global warming." Well, this is not relating to any provable scientific facts or data. Again, it's to an agenda of emotion and belief over fact. Here's a few quotes from Gale Bradbrook. She says, "Although for me this is a spiritual thing, atheists are very welcome." She said, "Inner work was a big part of my pathway." She said, "Most of us are white people at the moment, so they're trying to get more what they'd call ethnic minorities." Well, they're the sort of people who actually cause division by actually using identity politics. This is my opinion. A lot of these fake activists, well, I call them fake activists because I know real activists, they tend to go for identity politics, which is actually a divide and rule strategy. And she says, in affinity groups, we have a well-being officer. Well, she didn't mention the so-called dragons, did she, in her organisation, who threaten and undermine anyone outside their strictly controlled psychological framework. But Gale Bradbrook and Roger Hallam know nothing about climate change. It is their hook to carry out their psychological operation. This is clear when you hear them being interviewed. But the Extinction Rebellion is hollow. It's an empty shell for those who want to do something without having to take the responsibility of arming themselves with facts and data. And this is why they have no argument and they resort to ad hominems and distraction issues. This is why their use of whinging and not answering questions on TV exposes that they have no argument whatsoever. It is a globalist, organised cult doing the bidding of the World Bank and United Nations, promoting their Agenda 2030 principles and relying on the models and projections of the United Nations IPCC. The foundation document of ER, which we've talked about, they can't even do that properly. The author of the SR15 said Extinction Rebellion had misrepresented the document. So, basically, Extinction Rebellion is a lobbying call to bring in a draconian raft of policies on the back of a projected rise in global temperature, which there is no evidence of, and nothing that their mentors, the UN, have ever put out in their modelling and projections has ever come true. This is very important. And another thing is when they talk about since records began, look at when records began and how old the Earth is. It's laughable. You cannot judge climate on just a few years like that. It's ridiculous. Saying that we're having the hottest summer ever and all this. It's absolutely a lie. And it's a total fabrication to do that. So, getting back to this. They seem to be desperate to mitigate this long predicted rise in Earth's surface temperatures, which of course would be impossible anyway. There's no way you can do that. Nothing that we do will ever mitigate that, apart from the lunatic actions of geoengineers, people who are advocating spraying the sky with sulfur dioxide, and Extinction Rebellion don't say a word about that. Nothing about geoengineering, which actually is an even stronger indicator that they are a controlled group working for global interests. So this is obviously absurd. It would rely on dangerous technology, this stratospheric geoengineering with aerosols like sulfur dioxide, and this is already in use. It is actually being used, and the likes of David Keith, a geoengineer who I actually saw in action talking about this, about 3 or 4 years ago, talking at Oxford University about spraying the sky with sulfur dioxide. Now, these people are, in my view, criminally insane if they actually get away with doing it, because they're doing it for an agenda. This has got nothing to do with the climate. Now, basically, these lunatics are going to roll this out all over the world. Now, there's little doubt that these geoengineering operations have been going on for some time. The government are stating in their paper, the regulation of geoengineering 2010, that it is regulated and in an experimental phase only. Well, it seems to be prevalent, and we have done a lot of research into this. But look into the geoengineering issue, tell people within the Extinction Rebellion movement about it and see what they say. See what they've got to say about 5G. See what they've got to say about smart cities. See what they've got to say about the Internet of Things. Nothing. So the Extinction Rebellion manifesto is the government must tell the truth by declaring a climate and ecological emergency, working with other institutions to communicate the urgency for change. Government must act now to halt biodiversity loss and reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2025. Net zero means everything dies. So there's no CO2 emissions, no humans, no food and no energy. Again, look at our show, The Green Energy Agenda. If you think that renewables are in any way useful at the moment, they are not fulfilling their purpose, and the government knows it. The government is openly lying about renewables, but there's a huge industry in mitigation. This is what the banks are all interested in. So it says, beyond politics, this is on the Extinction Rebellion website, government must create and be led by the decisions of a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice. That's basically an unelected body of change agents who are speaking on your behalf and giving a consensus. So basically the above would circumvent democracy. It would install an unelected body who are all the same mindset and have been indoctrinated into groupthink and will not tolerate facts but operate on belief and emotion, which are the goals of Extinction Rebellion. This is their psychological model. It's very similar to any totalitarian regime. So this is what a takeover by the UN on the back of the climate agenda would look like. In fact, this is exactly what Extinction Rebellion are advocating, exactly the same thing. So now let's get on to the profitable delusions of Gale Bradbrook, the founder of Extinction Rebellion and the director of Compassionate Revolution Limited. Gale spouts the same cliches about global wealth distribution as those who took over Occupy for the climate change mitigation money spinner. She says climate change is a symptom of a toxic system. The democracy is fake. We want a citizens' assembly which bypasses democratic decisions. Can you get the irony of this? We want a citizens' assembly which bypasses democratic decisions. So we want to bypass democracy with our consensus. This is totalitarian. This is unbelievable when you actually see it written down. Roger Hallam talks about a research-driven process and how progressive and radicals organise. He says they have come out with a number of innovations. He says the gravity of the climate catastrophe is in progress now. He says progressive movements have failed over the past 30 years. And he was a consensus trainer for 10 years. What a surprise. Rising Up did research and came up with innovations to have a holocratic structure, he says. We moved on from large-scale consensus. Well, it looks like they've still got the same thing in place to me. He says we want to facilitate an ordered, rapid mobilisation. Well, they certainly seem to have achieved that. They want to move towards that mass participation and mass disobedience, and they say that's the best way to bring about change. Disruptive and sacrificial mass action compares it to, basically disruptive and sacrificial mass action is what he advocates, and he compares it to the struggle of black activists in southern states of America, which is rather absurd. He intends to act as though that truth were real. So basically it's all about visioning. Visioning is a big part of that. It's a big part of this psychological program which these people are all part of. So they vision things, they have visioning meetings. He quotes Jane Morton, a psychologist, does Roger. He says, why aren't the Green Movement asking how bad things are and acting accordingly? Now, let's get on to this. This is another important connection. It's called the climate mobilisation. It's linked in to Gale Bradbrook and Roger Hallam through Margaret Klein Solomon. She started up the climate mobilisation. And it says here that 5% of Extinction Rebellion donations go to the climate mobilisation, which featured in the Extinction Rebellion's presentations. Now, amongst other industrial wish lists, the climate mobilisation want geoengineering and they want carbon sequestration, which is basically this highly controversial and hugely expensive way of sucking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. It's totally insane. We need more, not less carbon dioxide. 400 parts per million is nothing. She's an advocate of Gale and Roger, and you can find an interview with plenty of fawning, backslapping and self-congratulation on the Extinction Rebellion YouTube channel with Margaret Klein Solomon. Now, let's have a look at the climate mobilisation. We launched at the People's Climate March in 2014 as the first group organising for a World War II scale climate response. This is what they talk about, a World War II type mobilisation, an idea that had emerged as a hidden consensus among climate experts, really. In other words, another organisation with the same template as all the other organisations linked to Extinction Rebellion. It was founded in 2014. The executive director and the founder is psychologist Margaret Klein Solomon. The primary goal is here. I'll state it. It's on the website. Our mission is to save civilization. Well, that's good of them, isn't it? They're doing all that on our behalf. Thank you so much. And to do so, Solomon outlines a wartime-style mobilisation akin to the American home front during World War II. Rally the troops, rally the troops, rally the change agents, rally the entitled narcissists who want to do yoga in the middle of Waterloo Bridge. The climate mobilisation is a growing group of people who know that climate change threatens the collapse of civilization within this century. So how do they know that then? No one else seems to know it, but they do. We believe, oh here we go, it's all about belief. We believe, along with many well-respected scientists, well, scientists that they cherry-pick, scientists who are part of the scientific consensus, the non-existent 97%, which is actually 0.3%. The 97% was the 97% who agreed, by the way, against the consensus, which is what they want. They don't want anyone to disagree with this, do they? It ruined the party. So they say that the only way to preserve a climate that is safe, stable and supportive of human civilization is to fight climate change with a World War II scale mobilisation. Now, you can't do this because we cannot affect the climate. We are a tiny part of what's happening on this earth. Anyone who's, oh, I know you're not allowed to fly now, but go up in a plane, go around the world, have a look at what weather systems are actually like. Better still, look at satellite data. It's all there. This stuff is way beyond what we can do anything about. So what they want to do is tie extreme weather events like hurricanes into climate change. Well, yes, it's the climate change is when there's a hurricane, but it's nothing to do with man. Okay, so it is all the same propaganda, and its emotional responses over fact. It states as fact things that which aren't even proven, and statements, yeah, again, which are inaccurate and untrue. Now, Solomon has a website called theclimatepsychologist.com. You can go on there if you feel hurt about climate, and she'll talk to you and she will counsel you about climate change, and you can cry together. It's this kind of thing. It's all about, basically it's about self-indulgence and narcissism over something which is just been hooked on to a movement. So it says Solomon's strength as a psychologist is specialising in climate change. Wait a minute, how can a psychologist specialise in climate change? You have to be a meteorologist, an astrophysicist, or the new word for that is climatologist. So she's not none of those things. So she's basically a psychologist, a bit like Gale, who's into psychology, and they've just latched onto the global warming thing to find something to rally themselves around. So basically they're all the same kind of cookie cutter, cardboard cutout template people, the same as the cardboard cutout template organisations. So basically it's exactly what Annex 1 states. It says here, across the world are now embracing, this is basically Annex 1 of her website, embracing via the establishment of nudge units. So she's into psychological nudge units. That is the implementation of use of behavioural science for policy within government. That's what she specialises in. So basically this is a psychological programme. Solomon earned her PhD in clinical psychology from Adelphi University, probably where they teach Delphi technique then, and also holds a BA in social anthropology from Harvard. Via climate mobilisation, Solomon applies her psychological and anthropological knowledge to solving climate change. Now, this Solomon woman, she's incredible, isn't she? She's going to solve climate change for us. I mean, the mind boggles. She's a genius. I mean, she's the author of the blog, The Climate Psychologist. Yeah, have a look at that if you've got time. Margaret Klein Solomon, who trained as a clinical psychologist before founding the Climate Advocacy Organisation. climate mobilization, the one we've been talking about, she said that it's no surprise that people can't process the truth about the climate crisis. Well, it's no surprise with people like her and Gale about, and instead they construct defense mechanisms against it. This is what psychologists do. If you agree or disagree, basically if you disagree with a paradigm, then you've got some kind of psychological problem. This is Brave New World. This is Clockwork Orange, actually. Basically, this is the type of psychology they're talking about. Let's get this person sectioned. They don't believe that the world is getting hotter and we're all going to be dead by 2050 or whenever it is, or in 12 years' time. You know, it's people who actually say that who should be sectioned, because they certainly don't know anything about what's going on the planet. It says in 20 years, what now registers as an extreme heat wave will likely be the norm. By 2045, more than 300,000 US homes will be lost to encroaching oceans. Absolute pack of lies, and that's been proven. The data that they use is completely flawed. Ask world-leading expert in sea levels, Niels Axel Morner. Have a look at our video, which is all about fake sea rise levels, and basically they're trying to do a thing called managed retreat. They're trying to get people out of seaside resorts. They want everybody in cities. It's all about the privatization and ownership of land and also the oceans. Okay, so by 2100, $1 trillion worth of real estate will be lost in the US alone. Well, it'd be lost because the banks will have taken it all back, because it's the austerity that's going to be enforced through these climate change policies. So she's right there. She's absolutely spot on there. Yes, all that real estate will be gone because people will be thrown out of their homes as the banks repossess their properties on the back of this new taxation system. She says as atmospheric carbon levels rise, plants produce more sugars and fewer nutrients. By 2050, vegetables will be turning into junk food. What on earth is she talking about? Why would vegetables be turning into junk food? There's a huge overlap between things that wreak havoc on the climate and things that serve a materialist version of the good, comfortable life. Meat eating, air conditioning, air travel. Now, when Maurice Strong got up at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, he said the affluent lifestyles of the middle classes are unsustainable, and that includes all the things that Margaret Solomon is saying here. So basically, this is UN Agenda 21 on the back of a psychological operation. She's basically said, so Maurice Strong said meat eating, air conditioning, air travel, all those things were unsustainable. So she's just echoing what this criminal Maurice Strong, Iraq for oil scandal, look at that, he ended up in China. He got a load of money from the UN. He became basically the big ambassador for Agenda 21 and the Global Action Plan. International criminal. She said it's a basic part of being human that our minds frequently deal with competing interests. That's how defense mechanisms are formed. Here she goes. So what she's doing is saying any resistance to the way that she thinks or what she says means that you've got a mental illness. This is absolutely outrageous. Solomon hosts periodic phone sessions where callers can dial in to discuss their feelings about climate change and climate activism. All sorts of emotions have come up on these calls. Guilt and shame, grief, panic, helplessness, even destructive glee from people who are angry that their warnings haven't been heeded. Solomon stresses the importance of processing climate change as an emotional and personal phenomenon. Yeah, no facts then, as usual. Not just a scientific one. Well, not a scientific one at all, if you listen to her. Everyone, she said, needs to grieve for their own futures. Can you believe this? Can you believe that? This is absolutely insane, and I can't even believe that anyone would say that. Grieving for your own future, which aren't going to look the way we thought. They're certainly not going to be the way she thinks. They're going to be more parched, it says here. Oh dear, it just carries on and on. Dangerous, more parched, dangerous, and more austere. Well, definitely more austere, because that trillions of dollars of property is definitely going to be stolen. So she's right about one thing. Now, getting on to Helen Mountford, she's the program director for the New Climate Economy Project and the director of economics at World Resources Institute, also again linked into the Extinction Rebellion cult. Prior to this appointment, Mountford served as the deputy director of environment for the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, that one's called. So basically, beyond its formal research partnerships, it says here, the new climate economy is aligned with the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, International Energy Agency, regional development banks, UN agencies and OECD. They control the narrative. They're controlling climate change. That's what climate change is all about. It says on the website here, Helen Mountford, the new climate economy project says we launched at the People's Climate March 2014. There you go. Here we have an NGO that would very much appreciate Greta Thunberg's delivery. That was from an article I pulled out, as I quoted earlier on. I think that was some information which is on The Wrong Kind of Green. Very good blog, that, about Greta Thunberg. Basically, it goes on and on and on. So then we get to the invention of Greta Thunberg, which we'll finish off with, which is extremely important in the Extinction Rebellion story, because the Extinction Rebellion story is intricately linked to the World Bank and the United Nations. So basically, Greta Thunberg said, how is it possible for you to be so easily tricked by something so simple as a story? Because you are tricked. Well, it all comes down to one core thing, and that is emotional investment. This is from this blog, and I would recommend you read it. It says, the more emotionally invested you are in anything in your life, the less critical and less objectively observant you become. I think we've actually made that point over and over and over again tonight. And that was from David J. Phillips from We Don't Have Time, the Board of Directors, The Magical Science of Storytelling. So, all of those are quotes from him. How is it possible for you to be so easily tricked by something so simple as a story? Because you are tricked. He's the person who promoted Greta Thunberg. So he's a PR spin doctor, and he's used Greta Thunberg because of his agency. We Don't Have Time. He's one of the board of directors, and his book, which that came from, was called The Magical Science of Storytelling. Spin doctoring, basically. He says our goal is to become among the biggest players on the internet. Remember, this is the person who brought to the forefront Greta Thunberg, this 16-year-old kid who started protesting outside a school. And she started the school climate strikes, which are all over the world now. She's also the pin-up girl of the UN. So this was Ingmar Rentzhog. He's the director of We Don't Have Time. Basically, she's Greta's parents' PR company. This is the way that she has been absolutely manufactured. Now let's go to their website. Let's have a look at their website. We Don't Have Time website. It says a movement is growing, a movement of people saying this can't go on, we want change. Oh, sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? We want to connect these people. Social media has created new spaces for collaboration and collective action. Collective action. It's all about collectivism, you see. It has to be done under consensus. You have to be told what to do collectively. You have to agree. Herein lies our opportunity, it says. Together we are stronger than the status quo. Because the status quo is nothing without us. We own this and we can fix this together. We Don't Have Time is a social media network for everyone who wants to be part of the solution. Well, Greta Thunberg's mother's a Swedish opera singer and celebrity Malina Ernman, and her father is an actor, Svante Thunberg, while her grandfather is an actor and director. And her ancestors on her father's side is the Nobel Prize winner Svante Arrhenius, actually. He was a Swedish physicist and chemist who received the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 1903, so this runs in the family. He's known for a myriad scientific contributions, but it was his theory that an increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide causes the Earth's surface to heat. Now that is a theory, and this finding led to the conclusion, you see, that human-made carbon dioxide emissions cause global warming. So basically, that was on the influence of carbonic acid in the air upon the temperature of the ground, and that was 1896. So this climate change runs in the family. But on December 15th, 2018, Greta Thunberg, she was thrust into international stardom following a speech at COP24. And basically, I think we've been over that and Greta Thunberg. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because Greta is going to be a very big part of what's happening over the next few weeks with Extinction Rebellion. And basically, we're going to be talking more and more about this in the near future. because there's so much to get through, and it links into many other things. But I hope that's given you a good grounding into what's going on here. Basically, a controlling template of NGOs who all spout the same narrative. That narrative is the narrative of the World Bank. It's the narrative of the globalist agenda, Agenda 2030. So basically, we're going to get into some more about Extinction Rebellion. We've just about got time. It says here that Gale Bradbrook was one of the founders of Extinction Rebellion, the main British group advocating for climate mobilisation at an off-grid festival. This is the origins of what happened. It was a number of years ago, promoting her compassionate revolution, rising up concepts. In it, she referred to Otpor, exclamation mark. It was a grassroots instigators of the Serbian bulldozer revolution of the year 2000. And she described the people who partook in that as just a bunch of kids. They were anything but. She also spoke glowingly of Gene Sharp. This is Gale Bradbrook talking at this festival. This Gene Sharp, whose strategies were applied in the so-called colour revolutions that swept through various parts of the globe, culminating in the Arab Spring, which in turn inspired many to participate in the Occupy movement. Do you notice a pattern here of the way it's going circular? What she failed to disclose to her audience is the fact that Otpor, the group it subsequently spawned in other countries, and Gene Sharp, were all funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. Guess what? An American NGO whose activities run parallel to the regime change objectives of the US government. Now, this is where it all gets into globalism, you see, because you will not find these people criticising anything that's happening in Syria or anything to do with the Global Action Plan, because they're part of it. Basically, another notable oversight from her talk was any mention of what replaced the corrupt governments that these activist movements toppled. So basically, that's a really good point, because it's in this reforms that came about enabled the reorganisation of economies to suit Western multinationals. And in the case of Egypt, remember that, the coming of the Muslim Brotherhood to power, later to be replaced by the military dictatorship of al-Sisi, which persists to this day. So basically, furthermore, it's now known, it says here, that one of the leaders of Otpor, Sergej Popovic, who after his success in Serbia went on to found a revolutionary consultancy. We're going around here, aren't we, called Canvas. It received substantial funding from NED for organising groups in other countries, and it was well connected to Stratfor. Now, this is from a blog on nowhere.news, and it links into a lot of other stuff. But Stratfor are a private intelligence firm that gathers intelligence on geopolitical events and activists for clients ranging from the American Petroleum Institute and Archer Daniels Midland to Dow Chemical, Duke Energy, Northrop Grumman, Intel and Coca-Cola. Stratfor is widely considered to be the private security division of the American Intelligence Services. It was founded in 1996. Stratfor came to prominence during the NATO bombing of Serbia in 1999, when its analysis provided everything that the mainstream news networks needed to know, the controlling of the narrative there. The company's geopolitical analysis on the war on terror is headlined by the likes of the Associated Press, Reuters and the BBC. Without going into great detail, an influential figure within Stratfor named Ronald Dushan promulgated a formula for incapacitating anti-corporate activist movements, a bit like Greenpeace, a bit like Friends of the Earth, which Max Wilber in his book We Choose to Speak and Other Essays describes as follows. Let's just finish off with this, because we've now found out that Stratfor are linked in as well. So Stratfor advocates let's get this right. Stratfor advocates are dividing movements into 4 character types: radicals, idealists, realists and opportunists. These camps can be dealt with summarily. First, isolate the radicals. Second, cultivate the idealists and educate them into becoming realists. In other words, brainwashing. In other words, what Extinction Rebellion are doing, psychological programming. It says, and finally, co-opt the realists into agreeing with the industry. Well, that's what happens, isn't it? That's what Margaret Solomon's doing. They're saying, if you're outside this agenda, there's something mentally wrong with you. And if you're inside this agenda, let's grieve for our own future, because it's going to happen. So this is how movements are neutralised. Those who should be allies are divided, infighting becomes rampant, and paranoia rules the roost. That's exactly what happened at Occupy, exactly what happens at fracking protests, and it's all being brought in by the same people, the change agents, the social entrepreneurs, the people who are controlling the narrative of public opinion, not just at protests, but in your local area. It says to combat these strategies, we must understand the danger they represent and how to counter them. So again, a counterintelligence operation. Absolutely fascinating. As unlikely as this may sound to you, we would contend that isolating the radicals, educating the idealists into becoming realists, and co-opting the realists into agreeing with industry is precisely what the climate mobilization movement is engaged in doing. That was from an article on nowhere.news where they linked in all that information which backs up our information and goes beyond. There's not anybody has got the whole picture here. The picture's massive, but I hope we've given you a little insight into what's going on here. So basically, we know how all of this is working. We've got the climate mobilization. We've got the whole of the psychological programming behind what's going on here, the psychology that's being used to control the narrative of public opinion, and it's all about basically controlling protest by the state meaning the government, but above that the United Nations and the World Bank. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's show. I'm going to actually play an audio for our talk in Oxford, which is being organised by Calvin and Barry. So I'm going to play that little audio now, and basically you'll hear from me in a couple of minutes.
The bigger picture is kind of about the bigger picture, and it joins the dots of really what's going on in an area that's really social engineering, but ties into what's happening globally, but also locally. So when did you become aware of that?
Well, we've kind of known that for quite some time, to be honest, and that there's something going on behind the scenes that obviously is not, common knowledge, even though it's in your face kind of thing. So, through Calvin found you, and then he introduced me to what you were doing. And at the same time, we've been talking about doing an event, and we were just talking. We've been talking, and we just decided one day to, just you think, you come to a point where, you divulge all this information, and think, well, this has got to be put out to the general public. This is the only way, is if you can do anything, is to plant a seed in somebody's mind. Okay, so we're going to do it on the 12th of May, which is a Sunday, and we're going to be running it from 12 till 6 p.m, and it's going to be in Oxford. And what we're going to do is we're hoping people can go and find us, hopefully through you. They can find out what's going on. And then you, Sandy and Piers are going to do your talk about the bigger picture and help me learn. And we want to share this information with as many people and as widely as possible.
That was Calvin and Barry there, who are putting a talk on Bigger Picture featuring myself, Piers Corbin, and of course Sandy Adams, in Oxford on the 12th of May. Venue to be announced. Go to windowsontheworld.net. You can click onto the Eventbrite page there and you can order a ticket. It's only £10 for the whole day. And if you've got any more, we take donations. And if you've got any donations, please go to windowsontheworld.net. I do enjoy bringing this information to you. And I'm going to be putting out a series, and I hope people are going to be interested in this, because it's a culmination of all of the information I've gleaned and the research I've done over the past 20 to 25 years. And it's a way of uniting the whole of the bigger picture, the shows we put out, and what's behind it. Because when we start looking at ancient systems of law, we look at natural law, all of this stuff that is really part of us that we know within ourselves to be true is being taken away by psychological programming, psychological nudging, change agents, social entrepreneurs, all of these people in your local community who are controlling the narrative of public opinion. I hope you've enjoyed the show tonight, and I'll be back next week at 9 p.m. I will also be updating the website, the Windows on the World website, and again we'll be hearing from Piers Corbin with his ongoing counter protest. He's countering the protest of the counter protesters, because they are actually counter protesting, because they're actually doing the work of the government for them. So we've got counter intelligence, we've got counter protests, we've got change agents coming out of our ears. That's it for this week. Join us in Oxford on the 12th of May. Register your interest at windowsontheworld.net on the homepage. You can buy your tickets there. You can look at Barry and Calvin's page. They're called Nexus Events. They are really on the ball and they're really keen to see you there, as am I, as well as Piers and Sandy. So that's it from me tonight. Longer show than usual. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it's been informative. See you all next week.
You're welcome to Windows on the World, and the concept of how Earth to run today. Because today, the way the world are run today, they're not running by the law of lives. Because the law of life is just one law. But they create their law to go around the law of life.
Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and program stream at windowsontheworld.net.